you have a decade of experience prior to co-founding Fabi as a product manager for lots of great companies, Trisata, Clari, Assembled. I'm probably mispronouncing all of those company
No,
names.
sorry.
And so at those companies, you build platforms, APIs, self-service analytics. Drawing from that experience, when you're managing metrics, platforms like Fabi would allow product managers, like if you think about yourself in those previous roles, if you had a tool like Fabi, you would be able to very quickly spin up complex engagement metrics for your platform or your APIs on the fly. Would you be worried then about, or how would you prevent like metric sprawl, where all of a sudden you just have tons of different measures flying around. You're not really like maybe people on the team that aren't going to be clear about what we're really building towards. Does that question make sense? Do you see that as a potential problem or yeah?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the question makes perfect sense. And I do think that like there's always kind of this risk and also fear, and I think like justified fear that if you give everyone AI, then the AI is going to go and sort of like reinvent the metric every single time you ask a different question. And so we could talk about semantic layers. That's probably like
Oh yeah, that I hadn't even thought. That's a huge problem too. Yeah, exactly. Where
yeah,
you could have each person in the organization say, just ask their AI enhanced BI tool, how are we doing on this metric? And every time it's coming up with a new way and pulling different data. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's an
yeah.
even bigger potential problem here.
Yeah, so that's maybe another episode for us to talk about like semantic layers and kind of that sort of ties back to like the guardrails as well that we talked about at Fabi and make sure the team's actually like supervising and collaborating and working with the business stakeholder. But to go back to your maybe original question, if that's not 100% what you had in mind, which is like how do you make sure that? And actually, let me make sure I ask the question back. Is the question about how we um, actually, let me ask you for clarification on the question to make sure I understand, because like that's what I was thinking about when you asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely answer the question that you brought up. But what I was thinking about, you would end up with the problem that you just brought up in what I described, where if if project managers, if people across the organization, executives, product leads on individual products, if everybody can be using automated BI tools to be creating metrics on usage, you could end up having a lot of it could start to muddy the water around what the organization as a whole is building towards. Um, but even if there was agreement, so like what I think is more interesting about the question that you heard is that even if you have agreement across everyone and humans are being consistent with their definitions and the humans all kind of have a clear idea of what they're building towards, what the metrics that they're trying to optimize are with the product that they're building, the AI could be surprising them by recalculating things a different way. So does that help kind of clarify what I was originally asking?
Yeah, I think it does. And when you ask that question, I actually have there's like two things that come to mind for me. The first is that the role of the data team I don't think changes in the sense that like data team still needs to be there to help make sure there are consistent metrics and that we're all working towards the same north star as a whole, as an organization, as a department, or whatever. And like that's not changing, right? You don't what you don't want is you don't want AI that like this is why we talk about dashboards. Like, I don't think dashboards are disappearing in that sense. Like, I think that dashboards are actually going to be much more powerful and useful because there's going to be fewer of them. But the ones that are actually built are going to be curated and managed by the data team because they are tracking like the actual core metrics that matter for the business. It's going to be tracking your churn, your ARR, your retention, or whatever it is. And the data team is going to be spending a lot more time making sure that those are correct. Now, when I think about AI for the business, what I think about is like all the other questions that like haven't yet made their way into your North Star metrics or your OKRs, right? So as a product manager, maybe going back to your original question, as a product manager, I still do today as a founder slash product manager, I'm constantly exploring new ways to think about the data. So, you're thinking about your user activation, for example. Maybe at some point, if you're a mature organization that's growing, like your activation is very well defined. Okay, it's seven. You have to friend 7 people on Facebook, and then that's your activation metric, or that's our North Star. That's set. We're good. But a lot of organizations don't have that, or it's evolving, or you introduce a new product. And so you don't want to go and like model what's effectively a hypothesis into your data and like pull in the data, create these new tables, and then feed that and go through the entire process and feed that through your BI solution before you've actually taken the time to figure out if that's actually what you want. And so that's where you can, thanks to AI, actually let someone like, well, ideally a pair of like a data scientist and a product manager, or a data scientist and a CSM or whoever, work together to kind of explore that messy phase and see like, okay, like, does this metric actually make sense? Is this how we want to think about it? And a lot of times I think what you'll find when you do that is, again, I'll draw my own experience as a product manager. You'll kind of look at the data and be like, actually, that was the wrong question I was asking. Let me rethink about what I'm really asking, and I'll get back to you. And if as a product manager, I can start asking my own questions off the data that data scientists create for me, or off the raw data, I'm going to get to my own answer much faster. And then we can also just sort of experiment and sit with that metric for a minute, for a month, or a quarter. And then if it's like, okay, guys, like, we're guys and gals, like, we're looking at this metric, and it's been the same metric for the last 3 months. Now maybe it's time for us to go and like build this into add this to a dashboard. That's the point where you can like say, okay, well, how do we pipe this data into our data warehouse, and like how do we add this to our data modeling and feed it all the way through. So I think you just need to like, as carefully think about like, okay, is this a metric that like we know that we've established and that is set, and if so, then like let's go through like the quote unquote like proper channels that have the right guardrails. If not, like, let's actually take the room to explore that before we go and overly invest in the measurement.